I am sort of an accidental entrepreneur only because I didn't know what entrepreneurship was. I had a mom who was a serial entrepreneur, and she will be mad at me for saying this, but it's true. She just never succeeded at any of it. And my dad was a career financial services executive for 50 years. So I had this interesting combination of those two lenses. And like many people, I thought the way I was raised was exactly how everyone else was raised until I was old enough and keen enough to recognize that wasn't the case. And then I became quite the avid student of life and ultimately realized that the things that I valued most were freedom, growth and learning, and connection. And those became the things that were the North Stars for me for everything I did then on out. And because the through line for me with all of them is connection, and they all generate the ability for me to feel that freedom of how I spend my time. And they allow for me to grow and learn continuously, which for me ultimately is what keeps me enthusiastic about showing up every day to do anything. On paper, I think so many of us have achieved the metrics of success that either we designed for ourselves or we were programmed, or whether subliminally or directly, or encouraged by our family, our friends, our culture, our whatever to do and to be, that oftentimes it can become jarring to hit a point where maybe you hit this moment in your life where you're like, oh my God, I have been striving for fill in the blank amount of time to get to this point. I didn't even think this point was possible or feasible. And now I am there and I don't feel much. Great example of this. When I sold my company, I had been building it for 10 years. And it was during the pandemic. I sold a live events company. So hooray. Within 45 minutes of signing the documents, I looked at my fiance and I said, I'm really sad. And he said, why are you sad that you sold the company? And I said, no, I'm thrilled that I sold the company. I'm sad that I don't feel anything. But to me, it was that really pertinent example that we all have heard and is so trite and cliche, but it's enjoy the journey, because I just got so blindly focused and, put my horse blinders on to only get to the outcomes. I was like, ugh, this doesn't feel like I hoped. And it really made me aware of this whole fallacy of when I do blank, when I achieve blank, when I get this much in my bank account, when I'm on the cover of that magazine, when that investment 2, 3X's, like whatever those are for us, that we know that it doesn't feel anything, which is why we ultimately go and then say, okay, what was the ceiling to reach is now the floor off of which to jump. And suddenly something that you would have once dreamed of and celebrated just feels passe. But ultimately, I really hope that if you're in a place where you're like, gosh, I have all the trappings, I've hit a lot of the boxes, but I'm just not feeling fulfilled and satisfied, then stay for the rest of this conversation. But I have found, both for myself and hundreds of clients that I've worked with, is when you are super clear on what at least your highest value, but better yet, your top 3 values are. And then you do a quick assessment of how am I feeling in orientation to these? There is always data in that information. And every single time someone comes to me and they say, I feel stuck, I feel stagnant, I feel dissatisfied, I feel unhappy, I feel whatever. And we look at what are your top 3 goals and we say, how are you tracking towards these 3? What feels concordant and what feels discordant? They always find something in there. I think the next first step really comes to the ingrained mindset. And it's asking ourselves, whose voice is that? Is that mine, or did I adopt that from someone else? And if I adopted it from someone else, do I actually want that to be mine going forward? But then you stop and you think, okay, I'm feeling this way. And a feeling is simply a signal and is simply information to tell you something is off. It is up to you to either bury it with more activity and more busyness and more productivity and production or whatever else, or it is a signal inviting you to slow down and ask the question, whose is this? Is it mine? And if it was mine, do I want it anymore? You can look at it and say, well, I can't tell the difference. Like, I was just grown up to believe, like a story that I was raised to believe was that my dad really intertwined the idea of success meant achievement in traditional ways. It meant having the bigger bank account, having the bigger house, impressing other people through the brands, through the cars, through the travel, through the titles, through the accolades. And whatever that is for you, it can be a very different story, but it can be very hard to say whose is that when it's just been there the whole time. There are real clues from the way that we were imprinted and ingrained through our upbringings in particular. Maybe my circumstances made me want to rebel in the opposite direction. So I built this story for myself that success was the thing I didn't have, or it's what I saw that other person have, or whatever that is. But stopping for long enough to do that is essential. And I think in that advice, can become a real challenge for people in slowing down. We live in a culture that really glorifies hustle and it really glorifies perceived productivity. But I have come to find that productivity in and of itself is not always effective or efficient. So to even give yourself 10 minutes to put pen to paper or to just sit quietly and close your eyes and ask yourself that question and maybe say, where's the earliest memory that I have that takes me back to this feeling that's associated with this meaning that I have created? And certain of those things are likely to crack another clue for you to continue to dive into this idea of, why did I decide that success means this? Does that still serve me? And if not, am I willing and brave enough to redefine what that means and take the steps to move in that direction now? It's like gardening. If you don't pull the weed out by the root, the weed will keep growing back and growing back and growing back. So you might capture it in that moment and say, okay, I see what this is. But until you get to the depth of it, it will keep popping its head up over and over again. And so recently I've been studying things like neurolinguistic programming and hypnosis and things like EMDR, other, talk therapies, and understanding that at the end of the day, stuff is logged in our subconscious. And the things that we think are serving us and these patterns that we've allowed to create these ridges in our brain that have gotten us to where we are now have in many ways served us. But until we can replace that thing and make our brain feel safe for something else to come in its place that might just serve us better now, it's very unlikely that we're going to do it. And so in a practice like hypnosis, for example, which frankly, I'm just studying for fun, just to understand how the brain works, it requires you to go to that subconscious level so that you can say, here's the root, here's how we find it, here's how we replay it and re-experience it, then here's how we heal it and root and anchor something else that is more beneficial to us now in its place. So that's something that you could do in so many modalities. There's not one right way to do this, but until you heal the root, the problem will continue to resurface. With smoking, it's usually not about the smoking. You become addicted to smoking, but you started smoking because it was filling some sort of desire state. Everything that we have become a consumer of, whether they're our thoughts and ideas or the things that we buy and the things that we choose to do, it's because they're helping us get to that desired state. They're fulfilling the problems that we have. So sometimes there are things that are healthy and sometimes they are not. So with smoking, I would venture to guess 100% of the time, people adopted that habit because it was fulfilling a deeper need. And then until you can replace that deeper need, like in the short term, it might be, okay, every time you get the urge to pick up a cigarette or do this or do that. But really the deeper need is every time you feel alone or every time you feel fill in the blank. And it's about healing that. And then the action's going to change. And I'd say it's using the cues of the things that aren't working for you. So if you're in a place where you're like, I feel like I am going in circles and the same pattern is reappearing over and over again, or I feel like I'm having this outsized reaction to this thing over and over, but like I can tell that that's kind of unwarranted, or I'm feeling unfulfilled, or I'm feeling stuck. Like anytime you have sort of that negative reaction that doesn't just go away, it's not just like a fleeting emotion. That's where the information is. And that's where you begin to do the self-inquiry and ask the questions. If you feel like access to dreaming is very natural for you and you are a natural born dreamer and you're like, I'm right here, right now, and I'm ready to goal and vision set, like goal plan and vision set and dream for what's to come next, get into that immediately, because that's a place that sparks energy in us. And that's a place that can make us feel excited if that's our natural proclivity. If it's not, then there's a number of things that I'd consider doing before that. If you're like, okay, I've addressed this, I sort of know what it is. Depending on what you learn from that self-inquiry, there's going to be healing probably that needs to happen and some rehabituation. So you talked about Tony Robbins' book. I'd highly suggest James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. It's excellent on habit formation and habit, killing for the things that aren't serving you. And he talks about so many tools, some of which are things like habit stacking. So let's say I want to read the newspaper for 10 minutes a day. Okay, well, what's something that you could habit stack that on that's already a habit for you? Maybe it's making your coffee. Every time you go to make your coffee, you open up your New York Times app or whatever you read, or you open the physical paper and there it is. Or you create rewards for the things that you do, or you create punishments, almost like you giving a contribution to a charity that you absolutely despise. and you do not want to give them money. So every time you do that thing, you're going to have to give them money. So maybe that's going to help you to not do that thing. What I don't want anyone to ever think is it's always about the ideation and not about the action. The two have to go hand in hand. You need to learn, integrate, then add more to it. And I think whether or not you think you know your path, this is a really illuminating exercise to help you get mirrors in your life from people that are in very disparate parts of your, experience, whether it's people you've worked with, family members, childhood friends, or whatever, your partner, whoever else. And it's going to ask these 9 questions that range from things like, what do you call me for when the chips are down? What's something that you know about me that you think I don't know about myself? What's a goal, wish, or hope you have for me in the next year? When do you see me at my best and when do you see me at my worst? And the whole point of it is not to take anyone's word as gospel, but to synthesize them collectively and say, where are the patterns? What is it I can really either learn about myself or stop taking for granted about myself because this comes so naturally and effortless to me that I just undermine it and think like everyone can do that. That's not special. That's not this. When really we get so much of our fulfillment from service, and service can look like so many things, but usually at its base, it's just giving of some resource we have, whether that's time, talent, or treasure, to help move other people forward in their journey. And that can be mentorship. That can be, giving financial donations. That can be like physically showing up and doing something. That could be the way your entire career or business is structured. Like, for goodness sakes, I became a coach and a consultant because that's all I wanted to do, was to help pay it forward to other people and help them grow into the best version of themselves. So letting those exercises be these mirrors for you to say, what's the information in here that I can take, and putting them all together slowly but surely of, this is what I value. This is what I'm learning about myself in career and what's serving me and what's not, and what's really the root under that. This is what I'm learning about how I create better serving habits. This is what I'm learning about how to break poor habits. This is what the people who care about me say and think and appreciate and see as my areas for opportunity and otherwise. And then building and building and building. Something else you can also grab from my website that's free. There's a page, if you just go to dara.co/freebies, it's a guided visualization that it takes you into that inner place where it allows you to understand your deepest gifts. It allows you to understand what people see in you. It allows you to see what people, on your deathbed might celebrate about you, or what you as a fly on the wall would be experiencing in that time with them. And it allows you to really dream of what is the highest, grandest vision and version of my life with whatever I hope I have left. And what do I want to do and take from here forward? The discipline bought you the freedom. And then the freedom got you to a point where you said, now I have the freedom of choice, which is the ultimate, I believe. And you said, I'm choosing to do these things because they make me feel good. And that matters. I think we don't talk enough about what our actions derive as far as our feelings and our experience with them culturally, because we reward, heads down, nose to the grindstone. And that really, if we're going to talk about the roots of that, that comes from the culture of industrialism and where our society is built around that. And I'm not putting any sort of judgment on that whatsoever, just where it came from. So it goes back to the same idea of like, whose story is that? Where did that come from? Do I want to own that? So when you get to a point and you say, now I have the freedom to choose what actually feels good, what actually excites me, where do I want to invest this precious time that I have? And it really, really goes a long way. Before I moved into coaching several years ago, I had been growing the other businesses and I'd written a children's book on financial literacy, and I'd done all these things that felt good. But I realized that every time I felt stuck and stagnant and I said, who can I serve? What is something I can do to get off my own BS and focus on helping someone else? I always felt amazing. My choice of, quote, like volunteerism is I put my time and my money into a program I helped co-develop to help people who are re-entering from prison back into society. And it's creating a mentorship program so that, it's scalable. Every single time I spend time with this community, I spend time one-on-one with someone, I'm in the weeds of the like actual configuration of the program itself, I leave feeling so good because I'm like, wow, those people have incredible perspective. Like they are doing this and that, and I'm learning from them. And at the end of the day, the reason I share that is because we often look at service and giving as completely selfless when really I don't think it's selfless whatsoever, because you walk away and you're like, I got way more than I gave.